When you hear the name Frankenstein, what's the first thing you picture? I bet it's a huge, lumbering monster with bolts in his neck, right? Grunting, stumbling around as villagers chase him with torches. And yeah, for most of us, that's the image. But what if I told you the original creature was a super intelligent, well-spoken philosopher who was only driven to villainy because he was so lonely? It's a wild story, so let's get into it. Because the journey of Frankenstein, from this revolutionary book to a full-blown movie icon, is one of the greatest reinvention stories in pop culture. And this quote right here gets to the heart of it. This is from the creature himself in Mary Shelley's novel. He's basically saying, hey, I should have been your Adam, your perfect first creation, but instead, you cast me out for no reason, like a fallen angel. He's not a mindless beast. He's a tragic figure who knows exactly how badly he's been wronged. And that sense of injustice, that's the engine of the whole original story. So how did we get from that heartbroken philosopher to the pop culture giant we know today? Well, that's what we're going to trace. We'll start with how a teenager's dare sparked this monstrous idea. Then we'll jump into the golden age of horror, see how it accidentally created the very first cinematic universe, watch it take a bizarre turn into comedy, and finally, unpack the monster's incredible, undying legacy. Okay, so our story doesn't begin in a creepy castle laboratory. Nope. It starts with an 18-year-old literary genius named Mary Shelley, a spooky ghost story contest, and some really, really bad weather. So picture this. It's 1816, the year without a summer. A massive volcanic eruption has made the weather globally chaotic. Mary Shelley, her husband Percy, and Lord Byron are all stuck inside. To pass the time, Byron says, hey, let's see who can write the best ghost story. And Mary Shelley comes up with this incredible vision of a scientist who creates life and is immediately disgusted by it. That becomes the first edition in 1818. But the really crucial date here is 1831, because when she re-released the book, it wasn't just a quick edit. She actually changed the entire point of the story. Let's break that down, because it's a huge deal. The first version, from 1818, is all about personal responsibility. Victor's big crime isn't playing God, it's that he's a deadbeat dad. He creates this being and then just abandons it, which is what turns it into a monster. But by 1831, Mary Shelley had suffered unbelievable loss. Her husband and several of her children had died. So in the new version, she rewrites Victor's story. Now he's less of an irresponsible jerk and more of a tragic hero, a guy who claims he was a victim of a destiny he just couldn't fight. The focus shifts from a moral failure to a kind of unavoidable tragedy. All right, let's fast forward about 100 years and hop over to Hollywood. Because this is where the story and the monster's image gets a massive makeover that will define it forever. Universal Studios basically built its empire on monster movies, and these three films are the holy trinity. The 1931 Frankenstein was a total phenomenon. Bride of Frankenstein, which came out a few years later, is honestly one of the greatest sequels ever made. And Son of Frankenstein just cemented the whole mythology for an entire generation. These films were everything. And at the center of it all was one man, Boris Karloff. I mean, his performance is just legendary. He could have just been a scary monster, but he brought this incredible sense of sadness and confusion to the role. The flat head, the bolts, the stiff walk, the way he moved his hands, those sad, tired eyes, all of it, that was Boris Karloff. He was the monster. And this is where we see the biggest change from the book. Shelley's creature could quote poetry and argue philosophy. He became a killer because he made a cold, calculated decision to get revenge on a world that rejected him. Karloff's monster, on the other hand, is basically a child. He can't speak, he just grunts and groans. He's totally driven by instinct and fear. And when he does something violent, it's usually an accident because he's just confused. The fallen angel was gone, and in his place was this silent, tragic brute. Now here's something really cool. Long before the Avengers ever assembled, Universal Pictures was doing the exact same thing with its monsters. They were creating the first ever shared cinematic universe. They called them monster rallies. It was a genius move, really. The studio figured, hey, people love the Frankenstein monster, and they love Dracula, and they love the Wolfman. What if we put them all in the same movie? It was a way to keep their biggest stars working and the franchises alive. And you've got to love this quote from one of the screenwriters, Kurt Siodmak. It perfectly sums up the challenge they faced. At the end of every movie, the monster would die in some spectacular way. Burned in a fire, drowned in a flood, you name it. It looked final. But, the movies made money, so they had to make another one. And some poor writer's first job was always to figure out how to undo that final death scene. And they got it down to a science. Step 1, revive the monster. Find him frozen in ice or buried in rubble. Step 2, have him meet another monster. The big one was Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. And then, step 3, go all out. Why stop at 2? Let's bring in Dracula, a mad scientist, maybe a hunchback assistant, and you get these awesome all-star brawls like House of Frankenstein. Of course, after those first few films, Boris Karloff decided he was done with the part, but the monster lived on. The role was passed around to other horror legends. Lon Chaney Jr., who was already playing the Wolfman, gave it a shot. Even Bela Lugosi, aka Dracula, played the monster once. But it was an actor named Glenn Strange who really took over the role for the rest of the original series. Okay, so after years and years of being the ultimate movie monster, the Frankenstein saga took a very, very weird turn for its grand finale. The monster was about to face his most terrifying opponents ever, a couple of comedians. No, I'm not kidding. The official last movie of this iconic horror franchise is a comedy. In 1948, Universal took its biggest monsters, Frankenstein's monster, Dracula, and the Wolfman, and had them face off against the #1 comedy duo of the time, Abbott and Costello. The movie was a smash hit, and it was a real turning point. You can see the huge shift here. The character went from being the star of Gothic horror, all about suspense and tragedy and genuine fear, to being a character in a horror comedy. He wasn't just scary anymore. He was so famous that he could be the setup for a joke. He was the straight man for Lou Costello's screaming. At that moment, the monster wasn't just a monster. He had officially become a pop culture icon. And that brings us to today, and the monster's unbelievable legacy. I mean, think about it. This story, which started as a nightmare in a teenage girl's head, has been haunting us for over 200 years. And a huge reason for that is the life it found on screen. The DNA of those Universal films is just everywhere. The sweet, goofy dad, Herman Munster, that's a direct comedic riff on Karloff's monster. Mel Brooks' masterpiece, Young Frankenstein, is way more than a parody. It's a shot-for-shot love letter to those original movies. Even in serious art house films like the amazing Spanish movie The Spirit of the Beehive, the entire plot revolves around 2 little kids who are haunted and fascinated by the 1931 movie. And don't just take my word for it. Film historians are pretty much all in agreement. The Universal Frankenstein series is considered the most famous, the most influential, and maybe the most important horror series of all time. They didn't just create a monster, they created the playbook for an entire genre. So that leaves us with one last question. After 200 years, after being reinvented as a tragic hero, a silent brute, a movie star, and a comedian, why is this monster still with us? Why do we keep telling this story? Maybe it's because deep down, it's never really been about the monster. It's always been about us. It taps into our deepest questions about where we come from, who we're responsible for, and what it really, truly means to be human.